I smelled the bleach before I saw the suitcase. The house was silent. Not the peaceful kind, the loaded kind. The kind where something had already happened, and you were just the last one to walk into the crime scene. My foot hit the top step, and that's when I saw it, right by the front door. A suitcase, mine. Not packed neatly, not with care, just stuffed. Clothes crammed in like garbage, the zipper barely holding. The bleach smell was stronger here, clinging to the air, mixing with the faint scent of my dad's expensive rye whiskey. Something twisted in my stomach. I didn't make a sound as I came down the stairs, didn't announce myself. I just walked forward, slow, measured, like I was stepping into the final act of a play where I hadn't even read the script. Sophia was in the doorway, arms folded, smirking. She was dressed like she had somewhere important to be. Tight sweater, flawless makeup, her nails tapping against her arm in slow, mocking beats. Arthur stood beside her, loose tie, half-finished drink in hand. He didn't look up right away, just swirled the amber liquid in his glass, like this was some kind of board meeting he had to sit through before heading back to his real life. Then finally, he exhaled through his nose. "Figured we'd make this easy for you." His voice was bored, like this was a decision made weeks ago, and I was just now getting the memo. I stared at them, my pulse pounding but my face blank, because I'd learned a long time ago, never give them the reaction they want. Sophia tilted her head, eyes flashing with fake sympathy. "Honestly, you should be thanking us. You were never going to make it here. This just speeds things up." Her voice dripped with honeyed cruelty, the kind only a sister could master, the kind that cut deeper than any insult from a stranger ever could. I glanced at the suitcase. "You packed for me?" Arthur took a slow sip of whiskey. "Your room needed to be dealt with." "Ah, that's where the bleach came in," Sophia giggled. "We thought about just throwing everything out, but—" She gestured at the suitcase. "Charity and all that." My fingers curled into fists. Not because of the suitcase, not because of the bleach, but because of the sheer casualness of it all. The ease with which they had erased me like I was just another mess to clean up, like I had never mattered. The rage curled hot in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. I exhaled, not once picked up the suitcase. Then I met my father's gaze. "You sure about this?" His smirk was slow, deliberate. "You'll thank me someday." Sophia leaned in, voice soft and poisonous. "You're worthless, and you always will be." I let that sit in the air for a second, let them think they'd won. Then I smiled. Not a big one, just a flicker. A quiet, knowing smile. The kind that made Sophia's smirk twitch just slightly. The kind that made Dad's grip on his glass tighten by a fraction. Then, without another word, I turned, walked out the door, out into the cold, out into nothing. And they thought that was the end of it. They had no idea. The night swallowed me whole. Cold wind ripped through my hoodie as I walked down the driveway, suitcase wheels dragging unevenly over the cracks in the pavement. I didn't have a destination, didn't have a plan, but I didn't stop. Not when I reached the sidewalk. Not when the house disappeared behind me. Not when my hands went numb from gripping the handle too tight. I just kept moving. Because if I stopped, even for a second, I might actually process what had just happened. That wasn't an argument back there. It wasn't some dramatic family blowout where people shouted things they didn't mean. No. That was surgical. Clean. Like I had been removed from their lives with precision. Like I had been erased. The rage was still there, coiled tight, buried deep. But I stuffed it down. I had bigger problems. No money, no place to go, no one to call. I made it 3 blocks before my phone buzzed in my pocket. For one stupid second, I thought, maybe it's a mistake. I pulled the phone out. Bank notification. My checking account, $0. Savings, closed. I stared at the screen, the numbers not fully registering. I had barely even used that account. I'd been stashing away money for months, working odd jobs to build up something, anything, and now, gone. And then, like a punch to the gut, I knew. I logged into the banking app, fingers cold, and there it was. The transfer, the date, the recipient. Dad. He'd cleaned me out. Every cent, not just kicking me out, making sure I had nothing. A slow exhale left my lips. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was confirmation. I should have seen this coming. I was never his daughter. I was an inconvenience, a loose end, a problem to be solved, and he just finished solving it. I slid my phone back into my pocket, swallowing the bitter taste in my throat. Fine. Let them think they'd won. Let them sit in that house in their perfect little life, thinking I was gone for good. Because one day they'd see my name again. Not as a failure, not as the daughter they discarded, but as the shadow they never saw coming. The hunger hit first. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where your stomach growls like some tragic movie scene. No, this was slower. A dull, aching emptiness that crept in as the hours dragged on, as my feet kept moving, as my body burned through whatever cheap, half-digested meal I last eaten. I had walked for miles, past neighborhoods I recognized, past ones I didn't, past streets where family sat down for dinner, where lights glowed warm behind closed curtains, where laughter leaked out into the night like some cruel, distant memory of a life I never had. I didn't belong in any of those houses. I belonged out here, in the cold, in the silence. With the hunger gnawing at my ribs and a plastic suitcase rattling behind me like some bad joke. By midnight, I found myself outside a gas station. Not one of the big chains, one of those grimy back road spots where the lights flickered and the bathroom key was attached to a brick so no one would steal it. The old man behind the counter barely looked up when I walked in. I did a slow lap around the store, my fingers twitching toward the snack aisle before I remembered I had nothing, not even enough for a damn candy bar. The hunger sharpened. I exhaled through my nose, turning toward the door, already half resigned to another night of walking, when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A guy, mid-30s maybe, dressed in a cheap suit, tie half undone, looking like he'd been through hell. He was standing by the register, fumbling for his wallet, cursing under his breath as loose change spilled across the counter. "Sake," he muttered, rubbing his temples. I should have walked out, should have ignored it, but something about the way his hands shook when he picked up the quarters. Something was off. Then I saw it. His car, parked right outside, just past the gas pumps. Sleek, black, too nice for the suit he was wearing. And on the dashboard, a police scanner. Not a cup. A guy listening to them. I knew what that meant. I had spent enough time in the wrong neighborhoods to know what it meant when a guy in a cheap suit drove a too nice car and kept a scanner on deck. Money. And probably not the kind he could report stolen. My stomach twisted. Not with nerves, not with doubt, but with something sharp. A decision. I waited until he finished fumbling with his change, until he grabbed his smokes and his energy drink, until he stepped outside, muttering curses at the sky. Then, I followed. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to catch up as he reached his car. He barely noticed me until I spoke. "Hey." His head snapped up, eyes bloodshot, pupils flicking to me like a guy who was used to being on edge. I didn't smile, didn't play innocent. I just met his stare, and said 6 words that would change everything. "You look like you need help." His jaw tensed, his fingers twitched toward his jacket pocket. But I didn't move, didn't flinch, just held his gaze like I belonged in this conversation, like I wasn't some homeless kid who hadn't eaten in over a day, like I was exactly what he needed. There was a long pause. Then, finally, he exhaled, ran a hand through his hair and muttered, "Get in." I did. And that's how it started. The second I slid into the passenger seat, I knew I had stepped into something bigger than I could fully understand. The car smelled like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne, the kind that tries too hard to cover something up. Empty energy drink cans rattled in the door compartment, and the police scanner crackled softly, muted, but still on. The guy didn't start driving right away. He just sat there, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, watching me like he was trying to size me up. "You got a name?" he asked. I could have lied, should have lied, but instead I just said, "Leo." He exhaled through his nose. "Leo." He rolled the name around in his mouth like he was tasting it, seeing if it fit. Then he nodded to himself, turned the key, and the engine purred to life. We pulled out of the gas station, tires crunching against gravel, heading toward the highway. "So," he said, flicking on his blinker, "tell me, Leo, how dumb are you?" I didn't blink. "Depends on the payday?" That got a laugh out of him, a dry, humorless thing that came from deep in his chest. "All right," he muttered. "Fair enough." He took a cigarette from the pack in his cup holder, lit it with the ease of a man who'd done it 1,000 times before, and took a long drag before glancing at me. "You ever heard of collections?" I frowned. "Like debt collectors?" He grinned. "Sure, let's call it that." The way he said it, slow, amused, dripping with something else, sent a prickle down my spine. I knew what he meant. Not the kind of collections with paperwork and polite phone calls. The other kind. The kind where people who owed money to the wrong people found themselves with broken kneecaps or missing fingers. I kept my face neutral. "You're a collector?" He took another drag of his cigarette, let the smoke curl between his lips, then exhaled. "Something like that." I didn't ask who he worked for. Didn't need to. Guys like him, they weren't freelancers. They had bosses, bigger ones, the kind whose names you didn't say out loud unless you were prepared to lose something important. The city had always had a few shadows lurking under its surface, and it didn't take a genius to figure out that I had just climbed into a car with one of them. The question was, why me? Like he could hear my thoughts, he smirked. "You look like a kid who's got nothing to lose," he said. "And that makes you useful." I didn't answer. Because he was right. He flicked ash out the window, eyes still on the road. "You work hard, keep your mouth shut, and do what I tell you. I'll make sure you don't starve. Hell, I'll make sure you win." He glanced at me again, this time with something closer to curiosity. "But if you screw up, if you make yourself a liability?" He let the words hang for a second before chuckling. "Well, let's just say my boss isn't the forgiving type." I should have hesitated, should have let the weight of the situation sink in. But I didn't. Instead, I just leaned back against the seat, met his gaze without blinking, and said, "When do we start?" His grin widened. Attaboy. And just like that, I had a job. Not the kind you put on a resume. The kind that made sure I never had to beg for scraps again. The kind that would make my father regret everything. The first job was simple. At least that's what he told me. "Just a pickup," he said as we pulled into a nearly abandoned strip mall on the south side of the city. You stand there, you hold the bag, you keep your mouth shut." I nodded, hands shoved into my hoodie pocket, the cold biting at my fingertips. I wasn't nervous, not really, more like ready. Like something inside me had already accepted that whatever happened next, it was just another step forward. The guy, who I now knew as Dominic, cut the engine and reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a thick black duffel bag. He tossed it into my lap like it was nothing. It was heavier than I expected. "You don't open it," Dominic said, voice casual but firm. "You don't ask questions about what's inside. You just carry it. We go in and we leave." I nodded once. "Got it." He studied me for a second, like he was waiting for me to break, for hesitation, for fear. I gave him nothing. Finally, he smirked, exhaled through his nose, and opened his door. I followed. The strip mall was mostly dead, one of those places that had clearly seen better days. A payday loan place, a liquor store with bars on the windows, and a single flickering neon sign that read, "Open," in a language I couldn't read. Dominic led the way, shoulders loose, hands in his coat pockets, like this was just another errand. We walked into a small, nearly empty convenience store. The bell over the door jingled weakly, the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap floor cleaner hitting my nose immediately. Behind the counter stood a man who looked like he'd lived 3 lifetimes in a single one. Mid-50s maybe, with deep lines etched into his face and tired eyes that barely lifted when we entered. He saw Dominic, straightened slightly. "You're early," the man muttered. Dominic shrugged. Traffic was light. The man's gaze flicked to me. "Who's the kid?" Dominic pulled a cigarette from his coat, tapping it against his palm. "New intern." The guy snorted, shaking his head before ducking beneath the counter. A second later, he reappeared, setting down a thick envelope. Dominic nodded at me. I got the message. I stepped forward, setting the duffel bag on the counter. The man slid the envelope inside without hesitation, zipping it back up before pushing it toward me. I grabbed the handles. Easy, simple, just a pickup. Right then, the door opened. The air changed instantly. Dominic didn't react, didn't flinch, but I could feel the shift in his posture, like a wire pulled just tight enough to snap. I turned slightly. 2 guys had stepped in. Not dressed like thugs, not loud or aggressive, but wrong in that way you just know they weren't here to buy anything. Dominic took a slow drag of his cigarette, exhaling lazily before speaking. "Evening, gentlemen." The taller of the 2 smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Dominic?" A pause. "Didn't know you were still handling runs yourself." Dominic smirked. "Didn't know you were keeping tabs on me." The second guy, a stockier man with a shaved head, tilted his chin toward me. "New kid?" I didn't move, didn't speak. Dominic flicked ash onto the floor, not bothering to answer. A silence. Then the taller guy's eyes dropped to the duffel bag in my grip, and I saw it. The calculation, the quiet decision. I knew what was coming a split second before it happened. He moved first, his hand dipping toward his jacket. Dominic sighed. Sake. Then all hell broke loose. Dominic moved faster than I thought a guy his size could move. 1 second he was standing beside me, the next his hand shot out, grabbing the taller guy's wrist before he could pull his gun. He twisted hard. There was a sharp, sickening pop, and the guy screamed. Stocky made his move, reached for something under his coat. I reacted without thinking. The duffel bag was heavy, packed with cash, sure, but also something else, something solid. I swung it with everything I had. It connected hard with Stocky's ribs. He staggered back, a choked curse flying from his lips. Dominic didn't give him time to recover. He was already moving, already grabbing the guy by his collar, slamming him into the nearest shelf with a crash. Bottles shattered. Something clattered to the floor. Then silence. The only sounds were Stocky groaning on the ground and the taller guy whimpering, clutching his ruined wrist. Dominic rolled his neck, like this was nothing more than an inconvenience. Then, with a sharp nod, he jerked his chin toward the door. Time to go. I didn't argue. I grabbed the duffel bag and followed. We slid into the car, and Dominic peeled out of the parking lot like it owed him money. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Dominic let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, kid," he took another drag of his cigarette, grinning slightly as he exhaled. "Looks like you're not useless after all." I stared out the window, my pulse still thrumming in my ears, and for the first time that night, I smiled. Because I knew right then and there, this was only the beginning. The rush didn't hit until we were halfway across the city. The neon blur of streetlights streaking past the window like comets. My hands were still tight around the duffel bag, my fingers stiff, my pulse hammering in my throat. I had just stepped into a world I didn't fully understand, and I didn't want out. Dominic let the silence sit for a while, cigarette perched between his fingers, tapping against the steering wheel as he drove, like he had all the time in the world. Finally, he spoke. "You ever kill anyone, kid?" I didn't flinch, didn't even look at him. No. A pause. Then, with a smirk that you know of, I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "What the hell does that mean?" He grinned, took another slow drag, then flicked the cigarette butt out the window. "You just cracked a guy's ribs with a bag full of cash and got out clean. Maybe he lives, maybe he doesn't. Either way, you didn't hesitate." He glanced at me. "And that's rare." I didn't respond because he was right. I should have been panicking, should have been shaken. But all I felt was steady, like I had been waiting for something like this. Dominic chuckled to himself, shaking his head. "Damn, I think I like you, kid." We pulled into a parking garage, the engine growling as he swung into a spot near the back, tucked away from security cameras. He killed the headlights, then turned to me, all amusement gone. "All right, listen close." He drummed his fingers on the dashboard, considering his words. "You just bought yourself a ticket into a world where things move fast, where there's no time for second guessing. You got instincts. I saw that back there. That's good. That'll keep you alive." He gestured to the bag in my lap. "But instincts ain't enough. You gotta learn the rules." I tightened my grip on the handles. "Like what?" Dominic's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Like knowing when to keep your mouth shut. Like knowing who not to dollar on dollars with. And most importantly," he leaned in slightly, voice dropping just enough to make the air feel heavier, "you never let anyone think they own you. Not me. Not the boss. No one." A slow chill worked its way down my spine, but I met his gaze without blinking. "Got it." He studied me for a second longer, then nodded. "Good." He reached into the glove compartment, pulled out another envelope, thinner than the one in the duffel, but still thick enough to make my breath hitch. "You're cut." I hesitated. "Already?" Dominic laughed. "Kid, you want to get paid weekly? Go flip burgers. This world moves fast. You earn, you get paid. Simple as that." I took the envelope, opened it just enough to see the bills inside. More cash than I had ever held in my hands at once. It felt like oxygen. Dominic leaned back, arms stretched over the headrest, watching me. "So," he said, smirking again. "You in or what?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yeah," I said, tucking the envelope into my jacket. "I'm in. Dominic's grin widened. Attaboy. And just like that, I had a new family. Not the kind that threw you out like trash. The kind that taught you how to burn everything you once knew to the ground. The first real test came 2 weeks later. By then, I had learned the rules. Not the ones people said out loud, the real ones. The ones that separated the ones who survived from the ones who ended up in ditches. Rule 1. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Rule 2. Loyalty is leverage. Never give it for free. Rule 3. If you hesitate, you're already dead. Dominic had drilled these into me without ever saying them directly. He didn't coddle, didn't explain things twice. If I was too slow to catch on, that was my problem. But I wasn't slow. And that's why, when the test finally came, I saw it for what it was. A setup. We were parked outside a rundown bar on the outskirts of the city. The kind of place where men with broken marriages came to drink themselves into oblivion. The neon sign flickered, barely hanging on to life, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked pavement. Dominic was in the driver's seat, tapping his fingers against the wheel, looking bored. "This one's easy," he said, exhaling smoke through his nose. "Inside, back table. Guy named Marco. He owes money. A lot of it. Boss wants him to know we're not feeling patient anymore." I nodded. "Rough him up?" Dominic smirked. "Nah, just give him a friendly warning." The way he said it set off something in my gut. Dominic never did friendly. I reached for the door handle, but Dominic stopped me with a casual tap on my arm. "Oh, and Leo," he grinned, eyes sharp. "Marco got a friend in there. Don't let him fool you." Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. Like this was just another boring Tuesday. I stepped out into the cold and walked inside. The bar smelled like cheap beer and bad decisions. Dimly lit. Just enough smoke in the air to make everything feel hazy. The bartender barely glanced at me. I scanned the room, spotted Marco immediately. He was exactly what I expected. Middle-aged, greasy hair. The kind of guy who had spent his whole life thinking he was one big break away from being somebody. I walked up, sat down across from him. Marco looked up, and the second his eyes met mine, something changed. Not fear. Recognition. Like he had been waiting for me. The back of my neck prickled. Something was off. I kept my face blank. "You, Marco?" He smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "And you're the new puppy? A test?" I didn't react, just leaned back, let the silence stretch. He chuckled. "Dominic send you? You already know the answer to that." He nodded, amused. "Yeah, I do." Then his eyes flicked past me, just for a fraction of a second. I didn't turn my head. Didn't need to. The friend. Dominic's words echoed in my head. And just like that, I knew. I wasn't here to warn Marco. I was the warning. I moved first. The second Marco's hand twitched toward his jacket, I flipped the table. Drinks crashed to the floor. Chairs screeched against wood. Then I was on him. His friend, a thick-necked guy sitting 2 tables over, was already lunging, but I was faster. Grabbed Marco by his collar, yanked him in front of me, just as the guy pulled a gun. "Try it," I hissed into Marco's ear. The gunman froze. Sweat beaded on Marco's forehead. "Dominic set you up, kid." His breath was hot against my cheek. "This was never a warning. He sent you here to get buried." I gritted my teeth. "Yeah, looks like I passed the test." Marco tried to jerk free. I slammed him against the nearest wall, knocking the wind out of him, then threw him at his own guy. The gun went off once before I was already moving, already grabbing the nearest glass bottle and shattering it across the other man's head. A silence. Then the bartender, who hadn't moved the entire time, sighed and reached for a towel, wiping the counter like this was just another Tuesday night. I stood there, heart hammering, Marco groaning on the floor at my feet. Then slowly, I turned and walked out. Dominic was still in the car, engine running. I slid into the passenger seat, exhaling slow. Dominic grinned. "Didn't die, huh?" I met his gaze, jaw clenched. "You set me up?" He took a drag of his cigarette. "Yep." I should have been pissed, should have wanted to take a swing at him, but instead I just smiled. Because I had learned something important tonight. Dominic wasn't my friend. Dominic was the next loose end I was going to cut. The moment I stepped out of Dominic's car, I knew I was done playing his game. For weeks I had been his shadow, his errand boy, his disposable asset. But tonight he made a mistake. He tested me, and I passed. But the thing about passing a test? It means you're finally qualified. Not just to survive, to take over. I didn't go home that night. Not that I had one. Instead, I took the envelope of cash Dominic had tossed at me like a dog treat and went to the only place in the city where people didn't ask questions. A 24-hour convenience store on the edge of nowhere. I ordered coffee I wasn't planning to drink and started making phone calls. Not to the boss, not to anyone Dominic had introduced me to. I called the people he never talked about, the ones he worked around but never with, the ones who had been waiting for a crack in the foundation. And I was about to give them a goddamn earthquake. It took 4 months. 4 months of moving in silence, of learning who really pulled the strings in the city, of collecting my own debts instead of Dominic's. 4 months of watching, waiting, knowing he thought I was still his some loyal little stray who would always come back. Then one night, I walked into his favorite bar. He was at his usual spot, a whiskey in hand, laughing at something meaningless. I slid into the seat across from him, set a single key on the table, and leaned back. Dominic frowned, picked it up. "What the hell's this?" I smirked. "Your apartment key." A pause. Then realization hit, slow, cold. His eyes flicked up to mine. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again. Voice low, calm. "It's not yours anymore." The muscle in his jaw twitched. His fingers curled around the key like he was debating throwing it in my face. He didn't, because he knew I wasn't just some kid anymore. I was the one who owned him now. "You little Careful." I cut him off, voice soft but edged. "Wouldn't want to make a scene, would you, Vincent?" Dominic exhaled slow and measured, like a man who had just realized he was sitting across from his own ghost. Then he laughed, a quiet, dry chuckle that held no real amusement. "You really think you won?" I smiled. "Dominic," I leaned in slightly, "I'm not thinking anymore. I know." A year later, my name carried weight in places my father would never set foot in. The kind of weight that made people sit up straighter when I walked into a room. The kind that made money move before I even had to ask. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And that's when I knew it was time. Not for revenge, not for closure, for the final moves. I had been patient, had waited, had let my father and sister believe they had erased me. And then one afternoon, I signed a single piece of paper, a property deed, to a house. Not just any house, their house. Their perfect little kingdom built on money that had long since dried up, on debts they couldn't outrun. On the illusion that their world would never come crashing down. I didn't send a letter, didn't make a phone call. I just showed up, knocked on the door, and when my father opened it, gray-haired, worn down, eyes widening as he realized who was standing on his porch, I smiled. "Arthur." Silence. What do you want?" I held up the deed. "Bought your house," I said casually. Figured I'd stop by before the demolition crew gets here." Sophia appeared behind him, still perfectly manicured, but with something desperate in her eyes. They were drowning. I had just pulled the last lifeboat out from under them. My father clenched his jaw. "You wouldn't—" I stepped past him into the foyer, letting the scent of old memories wash over me. And then, without looking back, I struck the match. Not literally, not yet, but with a single quiet promise as I walked back out the front door. "You threw me away like I was nothing," I murmured. "Let's see how you like it." And when the wrecking ball hit a week later, reducing that house to nothing but rubble, I didn't bother watching. Because I was already on to the next thing. Already building something greater. And the best part? They'd never stop living under the shadow of my empire. Every city project, every new development funded by me, by the ghost they tried to erase. And they would wake up every single day knowing I didn't just survive. I won.